He found a note in his late father's jacket. What it said changed everything. Daniel's hand froze the moment he felt the crinkle in the jacket pocket. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong, sharp and papery against the soft lining of worn leather. He had been moving slowly through his father's closet, trying not to think too much, just folding shirts and stacking them into boxes. The funeral had been 3 days ago, and the house still smelled like his father's aftershave, the faint trace of something warm and familiar that made it hard to breathe. He almost didn't put the jacket on the donation pile. Almost. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. It was the same brown leather jacket his father wore every winter, the one that squeaked when he moved his arms and carried the scent of smoke from 100 evenings on the porch. Daniel had never liked the way it looked on him, but it had always looked right on his father. He slipped a hand inside the left pocket, not expecting anything but lint or an old receipt. Instead, his fingers brushed against something stiff, folded, and light. He pulled it out and stared. A single piece of paper, worn at the edges and faintly yellowed. On the outside, in thick block letters, was his name. Daniel. Just that. No date, no other words. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, deliberate strokes that he had seen on countless grocery lists and birthday cards. A strange wave of heat went through him. It was like the air in the room shifted, heavier now. He sank down into the chair beside the closet, the jacket bunched in his lap. He didn't open the paper right away. His thumb traced the fold line, and for a second he wondered if it would be better not to know what was inside. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. A shaft of sunlight came through the blinds, falling across the jacket. He could feel his heart picking up speed. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the sense that this note had been waiting for him, maybe for years. His father had never mentioned leaving him anything like this. He remembered the last time he had seen his father wear the jacket. It had been last winter. They had gone for coffee, sitting at a corner table by the window. His father had complained about the cold and kept pulling the jacket tighter around him, rubbing his hands together between sips. They had talked about small things, news from work, the weather, the neighbor's new dog. There had been no hint of anything left unsaid. Daniel looked down at the note again. He imagined his father writing it, alone at the kitchen table, maybe late at night when the house was quiet. What had been going through his mind? Was it something good? Something bad? A memory surfaced from when Daniel was a boy. He had been about 8 years old, rummaging through a kitchen drawer for scissors, when his father had walked in and quickly snatched something away before he could see it. He'd smiled in a distracted way, telling Daniel it was nothing important. That same tight, careful expression came to mind now. He rubbed the paper between his fingers. It was surprisingly fragile, like it could tear if he wasn't careful. The temptation to open it was overwhelming, but part of him felt like doing so would change something he couldn't change back. Once he knew, he would carry the words forever. He set the note down on the arm of the chair, staring at it as if it might speak on its own. The jacket's leather creaked when he shifted. The smell, warm, faintly sweet from years of cologne, seemed stronger now. It was almost as if his father was standing right there. For a long moment, Daniel just sat there, the paper between his fingertips, the room holding its breath. He didn't open it. Not yet. He wanted to, but something told him to wait just a little longer, as if the moment before knowing was something worth holding on to. And so he sat, the jacket in his lap, the note in his hand, and 100 questions swirling through his mind. Daniel couldn't stop staring at his name on the outside of the folded paper. It was written in the kind of way his father always wrote important things, letters tall and deliberate, the lines sharp and steady. There was no mistaking it. This was meant for him, not for someone else, not by accident. It had been placed there with intention. He felt the weight of that more than he expected. His fingers traced over the ridges of the ink, as though touching the letters might bring him closer to the man who was now gone. He thought about how many times this jacket had hung in the hallway closet, about how many times he had walked past it without knowing that inside it was something waiting for him. Years, maybe. Slowly, he unfolded the jacket from his lap and laid it across the chair. The leather creased in soft waves, familiar and worn. The note felt small in his hand, but somehow heavier than the jacket itself. He didn't rush. Instead, he set it on his knee and just looked at it, trying to prepare himself for whatever it would say. The first fold came undone easily, the paper bending without resistance. A faint smell rose from it, not strong, but the sort of dry, musty scent that came from being kept in one place for a long time. There was another fold, tighter this time. Daniel hesitated. He thought about putting it back into the pocket, leaving it alone for another day. But something in him resisted that. His father had written this for him. He had meant for him to find it. With a careful movement, he pulled open the second fold. The handwriting inside leapt out immediately. His father's again, though a little less neat this time, as if written quickly. The first line was enough to make his chest tighten. "If you're reading this, it means I'm not there when you need me." The words sank into him like stones in water. He read them again, slower this time, his eyes catching on every curve of every letter. There was no greeting, no "Dear Daniel," just the sentence, straight and unsoftened. He let his gaze move to the next line. "There are things I never said out loud, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how." Daniel swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. His father had never been a man of many words. He spoke more with gestures than with speeches, more with a pat on the back or a quiet nod than with long conversations. But here, in ink on a thin piece of paper, were the words he had chosen when he had the time and space to think. Daniel's mind flashed through moments from his life, times when his father had stood at the edge of a crowd at his school plays, watching silently but clapping the loudest when it was over. Times when they had fixed things together in the garage, working side by side in the comfortable quiet. Maybe these were the moments his father meant when he said he didn't know how to say the important things. He kept reading. "I have always been proud of you, even when I didn't say it, especially then." The ink was slightly smudged at one edge, as if his father's hand had brushed the page before it dried. Daniel ran a finger lightly over that spot, wondering if his father had been tired when he wrote this, or if he had paused for a moment, unsure of what to say next. The rest of the note was still hidden in the folds at the bottom, but already Daniel felt a shift inside him. His father's voice was in these sentences, not just his handwriting, but his voice, as clearly as if he were sitting across the room. He leaned back in the chair, the paper trembling faintly in his hands. Outside, a car drove past, the sound fading into the distance. The house felt too quiet, like it was waiting for him to keep going. He looked down at the last fold. His thumb rested on the crease. Part of him wanted to devour the rest of it right now, to know exactly what his father had kept hidden all this time. Another part of him wanted to draw it out, to let each sentence linger before moving on. Finally, he took a slow breath and began to open the final fold, ready to see what came next. Daniel's hands moved slowly as the last fold opened, the paper whispering softly against itself. More of his father's handwriting appeared, crowded lines filling the page. His eyes caught the next sentence before he was even ready to read it. "There is something you never knew about when you were little. I almost lost you once." The words landed with a strange, cold weight. He blinked at them, as if they might change if he looked again. His father's voice, the one that always spoke with calm certainty, seemed to echo somewhere deep inside his mind. Almost lost you. He could not remember a time like that. The letter went on. "When you were 2 years old, there was a court hearing. I was told I would probably not be allowed to keep you. I did not tell you this when you were older because I never wanted you to feel you had been a prize to be fought over. You were never that to me. You were my son. Always." Daniel stared at the sentence until it blurred. He had grown up believing his early years had been quiet and simple, just him and his father in the small house at the edge of town. Now those memories felt different, like there had been a storm raging just out of sight while he played on the living room floor. He kept reading. "I sold my car to pay the lawyer. I worked nights I never told you about. I missed sleep and meals and anything else that could be missed. Every part of me was focused on one thing, making sure you stayed with me." The image of his father in his 20s came to mind. Young, maybe scared, but determined. Daniel thought about the second job his father had once mentioned in passing. He had assumed it was just to make extra money. He had never asked questions. The paper trembled slightly in his grip. He could feel the grain of the handwriting under his fingertips, where the ink had pressed deeper into the page. His father had been telling a story without embellishment. There was no attempt to make himself sound heroic, just the plain truth written in straight lines. "The day the judge said you would live with me was the best day of my life. I went home and watched you sleep for an hour. You had no idea what had just happened. You were clutching a stuffed bear and drooling on the pillow. I remember thinking there was nothing I would not do to protect that moment." Daniel had never heard this before, not from his father or anyone else. It was as if the walls of his childhood had shifted, showing rooms he did not know were there. He thought about how his father had never spoken badly about anyone from the past. If there had been anger or bitterness, it had been kept locked away. The next line felt softer somehow. "I am telling you this now because you are grown, and I trust you to carry the truth. I do not want you to think I was perfect. I made mistakes. But I want you to know that keeping you was the right thing I ever did without question." Daniel's chest felt tight. He could almost hear his father saying it aloud, in that steady tone that made everything sound simple and final. He wondered how long the note had been in that jacket. Had it been placed there just before his father died, or had it been waiting for years? He read the words again, slower this time. "Almost lost you once. Worked nights. Sold my car. Watched you sleep." The sentences were short, but they carried the weight of entire years. Setting the letter down on his knee, Daniel rubbed his hands over his face. He felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. Grief for the things he had never been told, and gratitude for the sacrifices he now knew had been made for him. The room was still. Outside, somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and fell silent. Daniel looked back at the page, knowing there was more to read, but feeling the need to let this part sink in before moving on. Daniel sat there with the letter in his hand, staring at the lines he had just read. His father's words were like a crack in the wall of his memories, letting light spill into places he hadn't known existed. He thought back to his childhood, the modest apartment, the second-hand furniture, the way his father always insisted they had just enough. He had always believed it was simply how life was. Now he understood there had been a cost to making sure he stayed with his father, a cost his father had quietly carried alone. He shifted in the chair, the jacket still draped over one arm, and let his eyes drop to the next part of the letter. The handwriting was slightly more cramped here, the strokes quicker, like his father had been pushing through something difficult to put into words. There is something else you should know. Years later, I had a chance to take a job overseas. It would have paid more than I had ever made, but the job would have meant leaving you behind for almost a year. I didn't even go to the interview. Daniel blinked, his brow tightening. His father had never once mentioned an opportunity like that. In all the years of hearing about work, about tight budgets, about repairs they couldn't quite afford, there had never been a hint of something bigger that had been passed over. The letter continued. Some people would call it foolish, but I knew what being without you would feel like. I had already been close to losing you once. I wasn't going to feel that again, not even for a paycheck with more zeros on it. I chose the smaller life, but I never regretted it. Daniel could feel the words settle inside him like a stone sinking in water. Smaller life. His father had never seemed resentful about their circumstances. If anything, he had seemed to take pride in making things work. Now Daniel saw it differently, not as acceptance, but as a choice. A deliberate, unshakable choice to keep him close. He read on. I am telling you this because you may face your own choice one day. It will not look the same, but it will feel the same. And in that moment, I want you to know it's not weakness to choose the people you love over what looks like success to the rest of the world. Daniel leaned back in the chair, his grip on the paper tightening slightly. He tried to imagine his father sitting down to write this. Maybe it had been after a long day of work, the television murmuring in the background, the jacket hanging over the back of a chair. Maybe the decision to write had been sudden, triggered by some quiet thought about the future. A memory stirred. One winter evening when Daniel had been 13. His father had been unusually quiet at dinner, poking at his food. When Daniel had asked if something was wrong, his father had smiled and said, "Just thinking about what matters." He had changed the subject quickly. Now Daniel wondered if that had been around the time the overseas job had been offered. His eyes moved back to the page. You may think I gave something up for you. The truth is, you gave me something to hold on to. You were the reason I woke up each morning with a purpose. I don't expect you to feel the same about me, but I want you to know the truth of why I stayed. The sentence struck him hard. His father's voice, steady and calm, seemed to speak the words in his mind. It wasn't guilt his father was leaving him with. It was understanding. It was a piece of his life Daniel had never been allowed to see until now. He looked down at the creases in the paper, the way the ink had faded in certain spots. This note had lived in the dark of that jacket pocket for years, carried through seasons, perhaps worn without his father even thinking about what was tucked inside. Daniel set the letter on his lap for a moment, resting his hands over it. He felt a heaviness in his chest, but also something else. Something like quiet respect, deeper than before. This was no longer just about the loss of his father. It was about the layers of his father's life, the sacrifices hidden beneath the surface of ordinary days. When he picked the paper up again, his eyes went to the next line, ready to see where the story would lead him. Daniel's eyes lingered on the next part of the page, the lines running close together as if his father had been writing faster, afraid the thought might slip away if he didn't get it down in time. The tone of the words shifted here. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about his father himself. I have to tell you something I never said out loud. I wasn't always the man you think I was. I made decisions I'm not proud of. I let people down. And sometimes, I let myself believe I had more time to fix things than I really did. Daniel felt his throat tighten. His father had always been steady, reliable, the person who never wavered. To see him admitting fault in such plain, unguarded words felt almost foreign. This wasn't the voice of the man who had taught him how to ride a bike or how to patch a leaky pipe. This was a man speaking without the shield of a father's role. The letter continued. When you were in high school, there were nights I stayed late at work, telling myself it was for us. The truth is, sometimes I stayed late because I didn't know how to be around you when you were angry at me. I told myself you'd understand one day, but I missed moments I can't get back. Daniel's chest ached as he remembered those years, slamming doors, sharp words over small things, the way they had passed each other in the kitchen without meeting eyes. He had blamed his father for being distant, never realizing that maybe distance had been his father's way of protecting something fragile between them. The words kept coming, steady and unflinching. If I could go back, I'd come home earlier. I'd sit down at the table with you, even if we didn't talk. I'd take the time to be near you instead of hoping it would be easier tomorrow. I know now that tomorrow isn't promised. Daniel rubbed his thumb over the side of the page, feeling the slight texture of the ink. His father wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't even explaining himself to make the mistakes seem smaller. He was simply telling the truth, leaving it there for Daniel to hold however he needed to. He kept reading. I want you to know that I saw you, even when you thought I didn't. I saw you grow into someone strong. I saw you fight to figure out who you were. I saw you fall and stand back up. And every time I was proud. I just didn't always say it. The sentence pulled at something deep in Daniel. He thought about his graduation day, scanning the crowd for his father, and finally finding him standing in the back, clapping with a faint smile. He remembered winning his first local soccer match and looking to the sidelines, seeing his father's quiet nod. They weren't moments filled with loud praise, but now he understood they had been full of something else, something his father didn't know how to put into words at the time. The last few lines of this section were written more neatly again, as if his father had slowed down. I'm telling you all this because I don't want you to repeat my mistakes. Don't wait to tell the people you love what they mean to you. Don't let the idea of the right time keep you from showing up. There is no right time. There is only now. Daniel let the paper rest on his knees, leaning forward with his elbows on his thighs. His father's words felt like they were pressing into him from the inside, reshaping memories, reframing the years they had shared. This wasn't just a letter. It was his father stepping out from behind the role he had played, revealing the man beneath. For a long moment, Daniel stayed like that, the leather jacket heavy over the arm of the chair, the note open in his hands. He could hear his father's voice in the silence, not as it had been in life, measured and reserved, but as it sounded here, in ink on paper, open, unguarded, and meant only for him. He glanced back at the next lines, sensing that the letter was about to shift again. Something told him the words ahead would be different, less about the past, and more about what his father wanted him to carry forward. Daniel straightened in the chair, the leather jacket sliding slightly across his arm as he lifted the paper again. The next section of his father's handwriting was spaced differently, wider margins, slower strokes, as if every word had been chosen with care. It felt less like a confession now, and more like guidance, the kind of thing his father might have said if they'd been sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. If you take anything from this letter, let it be this. Life is shorter than you think, and most of the things you chase will not matter in the end. The sentence was blunt, yet it didn't feel cold. Daniel read it twice, hearing his father's steady voice in his mind. His father had always been practical, but these words carried something heavier than practicality. They carried urgency. The letter continued. I know you will work hard. I raised you to do that. But I hope you understand that work is not the point. People are. the time you give them, the way you make them feel, the moments you share. That is what will stay with you when everything else fades. Daniel thought back to the years when his father would sit quietly with a neighbor on the porch, or linger after helping someone fix a car, talking until the sun dipped low. At the time, he had thought his father simply liked to talk. Now he saw it differently. Those moments had been deliberate choices. Another line stood out. Don't waste years chasing what doesn't matter. A bigger house, a shinier car, a title that makes other people impressed. None of these will hold you when you're tired, and none of them will come to your hospital bed when it's time. Daniel let the words settle. His father had never been a man of grand possessions. Their home had been modest, their vacations simple, yet somehow it had always felt enough. Maybe that had been the point all along. The writing took a softer turn. Love is the only thing that lasts. Love for your family, your friends, your partner, your children. Love in the way you show up, in the way you listen, in the way you forgive. If you fail at everything else but love well, you will have lived a good life. Daniel read that part again, slower. He thought of the people in his life now. Some he called often, others he hadn't spoken to in months. He wondered if he had been too focused on the wrong things, letting distance creep in where it didn't belong. The letter pressed forward. When you are angry, remember that most arguments aren't worth the cost of losing someone. When you are tired, rest instead of pushing people away. When you are unsure, choose kindness. You will rarely regret it. Daniel could almost picture his father writing that line, pausing to think, then nodding to himself before moving the pen again. It felt like advice forged from years of seeing where pride and stubbornness could lead. There was one more piece before the paragraph ended. If you ever become a father, or if you are already one when you read this, remember that your children will remember how you made them feel, far more than they will remember what you gave them. Be there. Look them in the eye. Tell them you love them, even if you have to learn how. Daniel's throat tightened. He imagined his father writing those words while thinking of him as a boy. Small, curious, sometimes difficult, but always watching. The realization that his father had been thinking about the future Daniel, the man he might become, made the letter feel like it had been written for more than just this moment. It was something meant to last. He lowered the page to his lap again, staring at the creases where it had been folded for so long. His father's advice was simple, but it was also the kind of truth that could take a lifetime to fully understand. The room felt heavy with quiet. Outside, the late afternoon sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor. Daniel knew there was more to read, but he sat still, letting his father's words echo in his mind, each one carving out space for something new to take root. When he finally lifted the letter again, he noticed there was something tucked at the very bottom, thin and stiff, peeking out from between the folds. Daniel slid his fingers into the fold at the bottom of the page and felt the edge of something smoother than the paper. It was small and rectangular, the surface cool against his skin. He pinched it gently and pulled it free. A photograph. It was worn and creased, the edges frayed from years of being tucked away. The colors had faded, leaving a soft, almost dreamlike haze over the image. In it, a younger version of himself sat high on his father's shoulders at the beach. The sun was bright, the sky wide and blue, and the wind had caught his hair, pushing it sideways across his forehead. His father's face was turned slightly upward toward him, eyes half closed against the light, but the smile, broad, unguarded, full, was unmistakable. Daniel stared at the image, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He tried to place the moment. He must have been 6, maybe 7. He could almost hear the crash of waves and the muffled rumble of his father's voice calling him champ as they walked along the shore. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same familiar handwriting, were 5 words written in pen. Best day of my life. The simplicity of it hit him harder than any sentence in the letter so far. His father had not written the date, not explained why this day was the best, not described what had happened before or after. Just those words, standing alone as if they explained everything. Daniel's vision blurred slightly. He blinked, but the words remained, steady and certain, like they had been waiting for him all along. He traced the letters with his thumb, wondering when his father had written them. Was it that same day, while the memory was fresh and the salt air still clung to them? Or had it been years later, when the photograph had been pulled from a box and remembered with quiet affection? He looked back at the picture, his younger self laughing with his mouth open, unaware that the man carrying him was tucking this moment away like a treasure. A flicker of memory rose, his father crouching down to adjust his shoelaces that day, then hoisting him up with a grunt and a smile. He remembered the feeling of those strong hands gripping his legs, the sway of each step as they moved along the beach. He remembered the smell of sunscreen, the grit of sand between his toes, the steady rumble of his father's voice mixing with the sound of the ocean. The words on the back of the photo took on a weight that went beyond the image. Best day of my life wasn't just about the beach or the sunshine. It was about what the day had meant to his father. And now, knowing what he knew from the letter, that his father had fought to keep him, had turned down opportunities to stay near him, those words carried an entire story behind them. Daniel felt his grip tighten slightly on the edges of the photograph. This wasn't just a picture. It was proof of something unspoken, a piece of his father's heart pressed between paper and ink. He set the letter down carefully on the table beside him and held the photograph up to the light. The faded colors glowed softly, like they belonged to another lifetime. In a way, they did. He wondered how many times his father had looked at this photo over the years. Had he carried it in his wallet for a while? Had it been taped to the inside of a drawer, only to be tucked away later in the jacket pocket along with the letter? Had his father intended for him to find them together, one revealing the truth and the other proving it without a single extra word? Daniel placed the photo gently on top of the letter, both resting now in his lap. His chest felt tight, but not just from grief. It was something deeper, a mix of love, loss, and the strange comfort of knowing he had been cherished in ways he had never fully understood. The room was still around him, the fading light brushing the edges of the table and the chair. For a long moment, Daniel simply sat there, looking between the letter and the photograph, the two pieces of his father's voice, one written, one captured, resting together in his hands. And then, almost without realizing it, he whispered into the quiet, "I remember that day too." Daniel sat frozen in the chair, the photograph and the letter resting together in his lap. The edges of both were worn, but they felt unshakable in his hands. Physical proof that his father's love hadn't just been spoken in small moments, but anchored in actions and memories. The room seemed to press in on him, heavy with the quiet weight of everything he had just read. His eyes drifted back to the photograph. That little boy on his father's shoulders had no idea about custody hearings or sacrifices or job offers turned down. He hadn't known that the man carrying him was already building a life around the single priority of being there. Now, with the truth laid bare in the letter, the image felt almost overwhelming. Daniel's grip tightened on the jacket draped over the arm of the chair. He pulled it closer and pressed it against his chest, the worn leather creaking softly under the pressure. The scent rose up, faint cologne, a hint of old smoke, and something else he couldn't name but recognized instantly. It was the smell of car rides with the windows down, of winter mornings walking to the bus stop, of evenings watching TV together in worn-out silence. The emotion came fast, without warning. His throat closed, and before he could stop himself, the tears broke free. They came hard and unsteady, spilling down his face and dripping onto the jacket. He clutched it tighter, as though holding it could pull his father back into the room. His breath hitched, the sound loud in the stillness. It wasn't just grief. It was everything. The unasked questions, the missed conversations, the moments he had assumed would always come later. It was the ache of realizing that his father had been carrying so much alone, and the bittersweet comfort of finally knowing the truth. He pulled the jacket up to his face, letting the rough texture press against his cheek. The leather was cool at first, then warm as his hands held it close. The letter and the photograph rested against his leg, the paper edges curling slightly under the tension of his grip. He imagined his father folding them together, sliding them into the pocket, and deciding, quietly, without telling anyone, that this would be the place they waited. Through the tears, Daniel thought about all the things he wished he could say now. He wanted to tell his father he understood. He wanted to tell him he was grateful. He wanted to tell him he had been listening all along, even in the moments when it didn't seem like it. But the words stayed inside, caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. The letter's advice replayed in his mind. Don't wait to tell the people you love what they mean to you. It was almost cruel reading it now, when it was too late to speak those words aloud. Yet somehow, holding this letter, Daniel felt as though a conversation was still happening, one that didn't need his voice to be real. The tears slowed, leaving his breathing uneven but calmer. He set the jacket back on the chair and picked up the letter again, smoothing it with the flat of his hand. His father's handwriting was steady, even in the most personal parts. The ink was still dark, unshaken by time. The photograph lay beside it, the boy on his father's shoulders smiling into the sun. Daniel's gaze moved between the two, his mind piecing together a truth that felt both new and ancient. His father's love hadn't been a matter of grand gestures or perfect words. It had been the daily choice to stay, to give, to protect. That was what had been waiting for him in the jacket pocket all along. He sat there for a while longer, the late light slipping toward evening. The house felt different now, not emptier but fuller, as if his father's presence had shifted from the walls and objects into something he could carry. When Daniel finally stood, he placed the letter and the photograph back into the jacket pocket. The paper crinkled softly against the leather as if settling in again, waiting for the next time they would be found. This time, Daniel knew he would take them out often. He wouldn't let them sit in the dark again. The jacket hung loosely from his hand as he left the room, the weight of it a steady reminder of the man who had worn it, and the words he had left behind. Daniel stood at the doorway for a moment, the jacket hanging from his hand, its weight pulling slightly at his shoulder. The room behind him was still, holding the quiet of a chapter in his life that had just been closed and opened all at once. He looked down at the jacket pocket where the letter and the photograph rested again, now knowing what they carried. It no longer felt like an old piece of clothing. It felt like a vessel, holding something far more valuable than leather and thread. He carried it downstairs slowly, almost deliberately, as though every step might shake something loose from the moment. The living room was dim now, evening light spilling across the floor in long, soft lines. He set the jacket carefully on the couch and sat beside it, his hands clasped together. The words from the letter kept circling in his mind. Love is the only thing that lasts. Don't wait to tell the people you love what they mean to you. Choose the people over the prize. They didn't just feel like advice anymore. They felt like instructions, left behind for him to follow. For a long time, Daniel had thought of his father as a man who lived quietly, maybe even cautiously. Now he understood that there had been nothing small about the way he lived. Choosing to stay, to sacrifice, to show up every day, even when it was hard, that was its own kind of courage. He reached for his phone without thinking. The urge to call someone, to speak to another voice, was immediate. His sister's number sat near the top of his contacts list. She hadn't been able to make it to town for the funeral, and their last conversation had been short, both of them wrapped in their own ways of grieving. His thumb hovered over the call button. When she answered, her voice was quiet, cautious. "Hey, Dan." "I found something," he said. His voice felt unsteady, but not weak. "In Dad's jacket. A letter. A photo. He left things I didn't know about. Things I think you should know, too." They spoke for nearly an hour. He read parts of the letter aloud, hearing his own voice waver but stay steady enough to carry the words. On the other end, his sister cried softly, her breath catching when he read the part about the best day of my life written on the back of the photograph. By the time they hung up, there was a different kind of silence between them. Not distance, but connection. Daniel sat back, phone still in his hand, the jacket beside him. His father's message had already begun to move beyond him. It wasn't meant to stay folded away in a pocket forever. It was meant to be carried, shared, lived. He looked at the jacket and decided then that he would keep it, not in a box or a drawer, but somewhere he could see it every day. And the letter and the photo, they would stay in the pocket where he had found them, a reminder of the moment he learned the truth about the kind of man his father had been. Later that night, before going to bed, Daniel stood in front of the mirror holding the jacket in both hands. He slid one arm in, then the other, and pulled it around him. It was slightly loose, the leather worn soft at the elbows, the scent still there. He slid his hand into the inside pocket, feeling the familiar crinkle of the paper. The knowledge of what was there, of what it meant, settled over him like the weight of the jacket itself. As he stood there, his reflection looking back at him, he made a quiet promise. He would live by the words in that letter. He would not wait to tell people what they meant to him. He would choose love over the prize, presence over ambition. And one day, he would write his own words for someone he loved, so they would know without question what they had meant to him. Daniel turned off the light, the jacket still around his shoulders. It no longer felt like something borrowed from his father's life. It felt like something he was meant to carry forward. And as he walked away, the letter in his pocket rustled softly, like his father was still speaking, still guiding him into whatever came next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.